And now, here is your host, Don Cornelius. Hey, Don, welcome aboard.
Have you ever wondered why Aretha Franklin, the woman hailed as the Queen of Soul, was never an official guest on a show created to honor black culture like Soul Train? Don Cornelius, the founder of Soul Train, once said the worst thing a black person could do was criticize another black person. But he was also the man who barred Aretha from stepping onto a stage generations of artists had dreamed of. Why did that happen? What had Aretha done to lead Don to such a decision, especially when her music was still worshipped by millions? Aretha wasn't the only one who ran into trouble with Soul Train. Prince refused to lip-sync and was pushed aside. Whitney Houston was once booed by the audience for not being black enough. Behind these stories lies a truth that, even today, has no clear explanation. Let's go back to 1971, when black faces were still rare on major television programs. Something new emerged on Chicago's WCIU-TV. It arrived without fanfare, but to the beat of fast funk drums and the flicker of colored lights. Soul Train began a journey no one could have predicted would leave such a profound impact. Founded and hosted by Don Cornelius, Soul Train wasn't just a live music showcase, it was a cultural celebration boxed into a TV screen, broadcast across America, carrying with it the pride, style, and soul of a community long forgotten. Imagine being a young black teen in the early 70s, living in a poor neighborhood in South Los Angeles, on Saturday night, sitting in front of a black and white TV with your family, waiting for Soul Train to come on. And then you see James Brown, hair bouncing and metallic suit glowing, walking through smoke shouting, "Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud." Dancers lined up on the Soul Train line in bell-bottoms and sunburnt leather jackets, smiles shining bright. In that moment, you didn't just see a show, you saw yourself. From 1971 through the mid-1980s, Soul Train became a symbol of self-affirmation, at a time when America was shifting after the Civil Rights Movement. The show was a bold cultural response. It said, "We're not waiting to be heard, we're building our own stage." While shows like American Bandstand still hesitated to showcase black talent, Soul Train flung the door wide open. Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, the Jackson 5, Curtis Mayfield, whether through praise, clips, or indirect appearances, they were all part of the Soul Train atmosphere, even if not everyone was invited directly onto the stage. By 1973, the show expanded nationwide through syndication. Each week, millions tuned in from New York to Oakland, Chicago to Atlanta, for a stream of soul, funk, and R&B that wouldn't slow down. Every performance, every dance move, every word Don Cornelius spoke felt like a living declaration of black identity. He often ended the show with a phrase that became legendary: love, peace, and soul. And just 2 years later, Soul Train wasn't just a TV phenomenon, it was part of everyday life. At high schools, birthday parties, weddings, and family reunions, people started forming their own Soul Train line to dance, from huge afro hairstyles to shiny platform shoes. Everything bore the spirit of Soul Train. It didn't just reflect fashion, it created a lifestyle. For young artists, Soul Train was the chance of a lifetime. Stevie Wonder, breaking free from Motown's child prodigy image, chose Soul Train to unveil a more mature and independent persona. Earth, Wind and Fire, before they became legendary, had early performances there under glowing lights and handmade stage smoke. It wasn't just a stage, it was a launch pad, a hand pulling them into the spotlight. But by the late 70s, as music shifted toward disco and hip-hop, Soul Train had to choose evolve with the times or preserve the classic soul identity. Don Cornelius chose caution. He allowed rap, but it had to be tidy, appropriate, and not too political. That control made some artists, like Prince, feel constrained, especially when he refused to lip-sync. Quiet tensions began to surface. Among the many conspicuously absent names across the show's 3-decade run, one stirred the most questions: Aretha Franklin, the woman who defined soul, who brought R&B to the Grammy table, who everyone assumed had to be the heart of Soul Train, yet she never truly appeared on the show. Why would Don Cornelius, a champion of black culture, keep his distance from the most important female artist of the genre? Did something happen behind the scenes that no one knew about? Something serious enough to turn a cultural icon into a name unspoken? The answer isn't easy, but to understand, we need to look closely at Soul Train itself, not just as a show, but as a cultural ecosystem. It had rules, standards, and one man steering the ship. And when artists didn't align with the vision of the showrunner, conflict could erupt at any time. After grasping Soul Train's significance as a Black cultural symbol, we enter a deeper chapter where stage rules began clashing with artistic conviction. And right there, the lip-syncing policy caused a long, simmering rift between the host and the voices. From the show's launch in 1971, Don Cornelius made a strategic decision to save production costs. He required most artists to perform via lip-sync. That meant the vocals were pre-recorded and artists simply mouthed the words on stage. This reduced technical risks: no mic feedback, no forgotten lyrics, no off-key notes, especially important for a fast-paced show with limited sound resources. For Don, it was a way to keep things smooth, polished, and uninterrupted in an era where every taping cost serious money. His decision made sense and held strong through more than a decade. The Jackson 5, the OJs, Donna Summer all delivered crowd-pleasing sets, even though none of them sang live. But not everyone agreed. By the mid-70s, some artists began to push back. Was it still a performance if there was no real voice? Artists like Al Green, whose raspy voice carried pure emotion, or Stevie Wonder, who viewed music as a dialogue with the audience, were uneasy with the rule. They believed that standing on stage meant living each note, each breath, and if you only mimed the song, that connection was lost. Fans noticed, too. Some viewers picked up on the awkwardness in expressions, or how the sound didn't match the singer's movement, though they still loved the show. There was disappointment because they weren't witnessing a moment of artist and song becoming one. The debate grew louder as other shows began featuring live music, making Soul Train feel slightly out of step. Still, Don Cornelius stood firm. To him, maintaining overall quality mattered more than spontaneity. Soul Train wasn't a concert, it was a carefully crafted celebration of Black beauty, fashion, and flair, and despite the backlash, it retained its magnetic pull for years, delivering hundreds of unforgettable performances. Then one day in 1976, with soul music entering a new phase and cinema starting to shape the music scene, Aretha Franklin stepped onto the Soul Train stage. She had just worked with Curtis Mayfield on Sparkle, a musical film about three sisters chasing a singing career, echoing the real-life journey of many Black female artists. She chose to perform Something He Can Feel, a soft yet seductive love ballad woven with slow melodies and deep bass lines, unlike many of her peers. Aretha refused to lip-sync. She insisted on singing live. There was no guarantee the sound would be perfect. No advanced technical support like major networks, but Aretha trusted the one thing she always had: her voice. And when she sang, the room fell silent. No backing track, no lazy lip movements, just a raw, powerful voice rising from her chest. It wasn't just a performance, it was a statement. Aretha wasn't there to play by television rules. She came to remind everyone that true music cannot be confined. Singing live on Soul Train back then was rare. Even rarer was that it came from Aretha, a Black woman, 36 years old, seen by some as old school, but by rising amid a new wave and singing with no filters, she proved something: this stage wasn't just for the new, it was for those with real worth. That moment inspired many artists who came after. People like Lauryn Hill, Erykah Badu, and Alicia Keys all referred to Aretha as a symbol of authenticity in music, and for the audience. It was one of the rare times Soul Train became a place where a performance felt truly alive. However, that very difference also placed Aretha in quiet opposition to Don Cornelius. He continued to run the show with tight control. Aretha, on the other hand, was someone who refused to conform to a set structure. Though there was never an official announcement after that performance, her name seemed to vanish from the regular guest list. Soul Train went on, and so did Aretha, but their paths never crossed again. Was that a punishment for her honesty, or the price an artist pays for not compromising? That question remains unanswered. Still, to fully understand why a legendary artist like Aretha Franklin could be effectively banned from Soul Train, we have to rewind time and trace the milestones of her career. It was a journey not only of music, but of ambition, resilience, and a quiet defiance against rigid systems. Born in 1942 in Memphis, Tennessee, Aretha Franklin grew up in a home filled with music and the spirit of activism. Her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was a highly influential preacher, often holding sermons at New Bethel Baptist Church in Detroit, where Aretha first sang gospel at just 8 years old. With a piano at her side and a choir behind her, that small voice moved many adults to tears. From those sacred musical nights, a star quietly began to take form. In 1960, at just 18, Aretha signed with Columbia Records. At first, the label steered her toward jazz and pop, with carefully orchestrated recordings. Songs like "Today I Sing the Blues" and "Won't Be Long" had modest success, but most were considered lacking in emotional depth. Columbia saw her talent but didn't let her sing as herself, a gospel-rooted voice, powerful and spiritual. It wasn't until 1967, after moving to Atlantic Records under the guidance of Jerry Wexler, that Aretha was finally set free. Her first track for Atlantic, "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You," was a breakthrough. Recorded at Muscle Shoals, Alabama, in a small studio with a local soul band, the song marked the beginning of Aretha's golden era. Just months later, she released Respect, a cover of Otis Redding's song transformed into a feminist and civil rights anthem. It shot to #1 on Billboard and became a rallying cry for justice. More than music, Aretha's voice became the voice of millions of women and people of color demanding fairness. From 1967 through the early 1970s, Aretha was the reigning female artist on the charts. Hits like "Chain of Fools," "Think," "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," and "Rocksteady" played non-stop on the radio, echoed through marches, church concerts, and block parties. Aretha wasn't just a singer, she was the soul of a generation. Her career was intertwined with social transformation. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, Aretha sang at his funeral. She also used her personal funds to help civil rights activists post bail. In the eyes of the public, Aretha was both a diva and a silent warrior behind the scenes. By the mid-1970s, as funk, disco, and dance music surged, a question emerged: could Aretha maintain her place in a rapidly changing industry? The answer came in 1976 with the Sparkle Project. Collaborating with Curtis Mayfield, a modern musical mind with cinematic flair, Aretha released the Sparkle soundtrack. Among its tracks, "Something He Can Feel" wasn't just a commercial hit, it was a statement. She could still reinvent herself, still be seductive, soulful, and in step with the times. The warm arrangement, slow groove, and sensual vocal delivery drew listeners in. Around this time, Aretha kept experimenting. She returned to gospel on some albums, collaborated with younger artists, and embraced modern pop. Despite all the changes, she never lost her real voice. That's what made her Aretha Franklin. So when she appeared on Soul Train and sang live during an era when lip-syncing was the norm, she wasn't just performing, she was bearing witness to her entire career. It wasn't just a number, it was a reassertion: I lead, I am the queen, and I will not fake it to please anyone. To understand the broader context of Soul Train, we must recall a rival that once threatened to overshadow it: Soul Unlimited by Dick Clark. In early 1973, Dick Clark, the white television mogul behind American Bandstand, launched a new show targeting black audiences. Soul Unlimited aimed to claim the spotlight Soul Train had built. But the move wasn't welcomed by the black community. Many saw it as cultural appropriation. Clarence Avant refused to cooperate. Jesse Jackson condemned the attempt and threatened to call for a boycott of ABC if the show continued. Don Cornelius, the creator of Soul Train, was furious. He saw Soul Unlimited as a direct attack on a space created by and for black people. In a rare interview, Cornelius said bluntly, "We don't need anyone teaching us how to celebrate our culture." He immediately cut ties with Dick Clark. Soul Unlimited aired only a few episodes before being canceled due to intense backlash from viewers and media. Meanwhile, Soul Train not only survived, it thrived. Cornelius expanded the stage to welcome hip-hop, rap, and new genres. For 3 decades, Soul Train was at the center of black cultural innovation. The downfall of Soul Unlimited and the triumphant rise of Soul Train wasn't just a TV battle. It was a reminder that no one can recreate without soul what a community fought so hard to build. And amid that battle, Aretha Franklin, the girl from the church who became a global icon, cemented her place not through chart rankings but by daring to stand on a stage and raise her real voice in a world obsessed with imitation. So if Don Cornelius felt challenged by an artist like Aretha, it's understandable. She wasn't there to comply. She was there to prove that music is real and culture cannot be shaped by a script. And that, perhaps, is why a legend could be banned from Soul Train not because of her voice, but because of the truth that voice carried. Despite all the conflict, the Soul Train stage kept delivering unforgettable moments. Around the mid-1970s, Michael Jackson and the Jackson 5 introduced the robot dance, stunning America soon after. LaBelle appeared in futuristic silver outfits and performed Lady Marmalade, launching an Afrofuturism wave that declared Black beauty had no limits. But by the late 1980s, a new wave shook the Soul Train backstage. Don Cornelius began to express skepticism about hip-hop. He felt it was too raw, too loud, and clashed with the refined image he had cultivated. East Coast rappers were seen as unruly. The sexy dance moves on the Soul Train line made him uncomfortable. Dancer Rosie Perez later recalled being asked multiple times to tone it down for being too real. As a result, a younger generation felt excluded. Soul Train slowly stopped being an experimental space and became a stage of control. From 1990 to 1993, tensions grew. Don Cornelius decided to step down, leaving behind the host's chair he once considered part of his identity. In 1993, Cornelius resigned, citing personal reasons. But everyone understood it was his way of letting go of a generation that no longer listened the same, danced the same, or believed in a past-defined image of artistry. With his departure, an era ended. Soul Train continued, but the soul wasn't whole. The dancing went on, but the echoes of a golden age became history. Yet truths from the past came knocking once more. In January 2024, a name long forgotten returned to the spotlight: Joe Cobb. The voice behind the catchphrase "You can't stop the beat" in Soul Train's opening, filed a lawsuit seeking $75,000 in unpaid royalties. Cobb claimed he hadn't received a cent since 2008, despite the show being re-aired on DVD, streaming platforms, and still using the intro as part of its cultural branding. The lawsuit made waves not for the money, but for a bigger question: who truly benefits from the Soul Train legacy? Cobb wasn't a star, just a voice. Yet his energy opened thousands of episodes, for years. Fans nodded along to his rhythm, unaware of his name, now standing up for his rights. He reminded the world of a bitter truth: some who built the soul of the show were never treated as part of its legacy. Only weeks later, a bigger storm hit. In the explosive docuseries Secrets of Playboy, aired on A&E in early 2024, a shocking allegation surfaced against Don Cornelius. P.J. Maston, a former Playboy employee, claimed that in the late 1970s, two young sisters were invited to a party at Cornelius's private home. They disappeared for 3 days. When they returned, they were bruised, bleeding, and appeared drugged. No police were called. Playboy stayed silent. Cornelius kept appearing on TV like nothing happened. There was no legal evidence, no arrests, but Maston's account and surrounding details sparked massive controversy. Tony Cornelius, Don's son, immediately denied the claims, calling it a baseless smear and noting that his father was no longer alive to defend himself. Still, the public was divided. Some couldn't accept that the creator of Soul Train might be a predator. Others asked why everyone had stayed silent for decades. That doubt deepened when 2008 court records resurfaced. In October, Don Cornelius was arrested for domestic violence against his wife, Victoria Chapman, in November. He was charged with preventing her from calling the police. By December, Victoria had secured 2 restraining orders, and in March 2009, Cornelius pleaded no contest, meaning he didn't admit guilt but didn't deny it, and was sentenced to 3 years probation. A string of revelations in a short time cracked the image of Don Cornelius, the man in the sharp suit who once spoke fluently about Black culture. Fans were stunned. Younger generations who once danced the Soul Train line now wondered if their icon had lived a double life. Soul Train was once a symbol of pride. Now, it reflected the blemishes of an entire era. From Joe Cobb's lawsuit to the Playboy accusations, from domestic violence charges to decades of silence, what had been buried finally surfaced. Yet maybe, as the show's catchphrase once declared, you can't stop the beat, whether forgotten, exploited, or misunderstood. The cultural rhythm continues carrying both brilliance and darkness. Don Cornelius died on the first day of February 2012. He passed in his Sherman Oaks, California home from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Family members said he left a suicide note, but its contents were never revealed. No one truly knows why a man who brought joy, dancing, and hope to a generation chose to leave the world in such loneliness. His death not only shocked fans, but shattered the image of a steadfast host they once trusted. Immediately, tributes poured in. Aretha Franklin, who once clashed with Soul Train, offered heartfelt words. She called Don Cornelius a man who placed black culture on television with pride, precision, and unmatched grace. Snoop Dogg, representing a hip-hop generation Cornelius had once resisted, paid his respects. He said Soul Train was the bridge that brought black music from living rooms to concert halls. Cultural critic Nelson George described Soul Train as a celebration of black joy, a stage where music, dance, and fashion blended into a living manifesto. Though he acknowledged the dark corners of Cornelius's life, George emphasized that the cultural legacy he left behind could not be denied. And that legacy lives on. In 2019, BET aired the series American Soul, dramatizing the creation of Soul Train with Cinqua Walls portraying Don Cornelius. Young viewers saw, for the first time, the struggles, contradictions, and emotional battles of the man who built a cultural monument. No longer a flawless host in a sharp suit, Don appeared as a father, a businessman, an artist constantly torn between ideals and reality. There were plans to bring Soul Train to Broadway as a musical, but the COVID-19 pandemic delayed everything indefinitely. Even so, the spirit of Soul Train never disappeared. Retro dance festivals, fashion collections inspired by Afrofuturism, and TikTok videos recreating the Soul Train line all prove one thing: the rhythm is still alive, just in new forms. Cornelius is gone, but his presence is still felt whenever someone steps between two lines of dancers to express themselves. His words on stage that every step is a declaration of identity are still repeated in dance classes and cultural workshops. He may have made mistakes, but no one denies he was a trailblazer. As this video comes to an end, you might be asking yourself, can we separate the art from the artist? Can we keep dancing to the beat of Soul Train without thinking about the controversies surrounding its founder? There's no simple answer, but one thing is certain: you, the one watching, reflecting, and sharing, are the one who will decide how this legacy continues into the future. If you've ever watched an episode of Soul Train, if you've danced to Earth, Wind and Fire, or felt the power of Aretha Franklin's voice, leave a comment below. What moment do you remember most? What do you think about what happened behind the scenes? Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video if you believe in the power of black culture. Because as the soul of Soul Train once said, you can't stop the beat.